Welcome dear learners. I am Ankita Lakra from Department of Commerce, Pandit Sundarlal Sharma, Open University, Chhattisgarh, Bilaspur. Today we will discuss Unit 4. It is a comprehensive lecture on aggregate demand and aggregate supply. In this session, we will study the fundamental frameworks that explain the overall performance of an economy. We will move beyond individual markets to understand the determinants of output, employment, and price levels on a national scale. This analysis is critical for understanding how economies function in both the short and long run. Let us outline our roadmap for this session. By the end of this lecture, you will be able to first understand the core concept of aggregate demand and aggregate supply. Second, you will study the specific factors that impact and shift aggregate demand. Third, we will examine the variables that influence aggregate supply. Fourth, we will learn the complex relationship between demand, supply, and employment levels. And finally, we will study Say's law of markets, including its examples and criticisms. Let us begin with the concept of aggregate demand. What exactly drives the spending in an economy? Aggregate demand refers to the total demand for all final goods and services in an economy during a specific period. It is usually measured in terms of gross domestic product or GDP. Mathematically, we express this as AD, AD which is aggregate demand. Aggregate demand equals to consumption plus investment plus government spending plus net export minus imports. Let's break this component down. Consumption, which is denoted by C, is the primary element. It includes expenditure by households on goods like food and clothes and services like healthcare. It is influenced by disposable income, wealth, and interest rates. Investment, which is denoted by I, refers to expenditure by enterprises on capital goods such as machinery and new residential developments. This is driven by interest rate and company sentiments regarding future profits. Government spending, which is denoted by G, comprises expenditure on infrastructure, education, and defense determined by fiscal policy. Finally, net export. It is the difference between export, which is denoted by X, and import, which is denoted by M. A positive figure means we export more than we import. Now, consider the aggregate demand curve. It depicts the correlation between the price level and the amount of real GDP desired. You will notice it has a negative slope. But why does an increase in price level leads to a fall in the amount of real GDP demanded? We can explain this through three primary effects. First, the wealth effect. When prices rise, the real value of money holdings declines. This reduces consumer spending. Second, the interest rate effect. A higher price level increases the demand for money, which pushes up interest rates. Higher interest rates discourage borrowing for consumption and investment. Third, the exchange rate effect. When domestic prices increase compared to other nations, local product became expensive for international customers. Consequently, export declines, imports increases, and the amount of real GDP sought falls. Let us focus on the supply side. Aggregate supply refers to the total quantity of goods and services produced in an economy given available resources. We must analyze this in two time frames, the short run and the long run. In the short run, the aggregate supply curve is upward sloping. Why is this the case? It is due to nominal inflexibilities, often called sticky wages and prices. These inflexibilities prevent wages from adjusting immediately to demand changes. When the price level rises, firms experience higher profit margins because their input costs like wages are temporarily fixed. This encourages them to increase production. Conversely, when prices falls, margins declines and production is reduced. However, the situation changes in the long run. In the long run, the aggregate supply curve is vertical. This indicates that the quantity of real GDP supplied is determined solely by the economic productive capacity, its labor force, capital stock, and technology, not by the price level. Why it is vertical? Because in the long run, all input prices, including wages, are fully flexible. The LRAS long run aggregate supply curve signifies the maximum capacity of the economy corresponding to full employment. Over time, the economy is anticipated to reach this potential production as wages and prices adapt to balance the markets. So, how are output and price level actually determined? They are determined by the interplay between the aggregate demand and aggregate supply. To manage this interplay, policymakers use specific tools. Demand side policies include fiscal and monetary policies. Expansionary fiscal policy like tax reduction can enhance aggregate demand. Similarly, expansionary monetary policy such as reducing interest rates stimulates demand. Supply side policy, on the other hand, aim to increase the economic productive capacity by investing in education, research and development and infrastructure. These policies improve efficiency. This helps mitigate inflationary pressures and promote sustainable long-run growth. There is a cost to stimulate the economy? The Phillips curve demonstrates a potential trade-off between inflation and unemployment in the short term. Expansionary policy may boost employment but also increase inflation. Conversely, contractionary policy may lower inflation but decrease output and employment. This is where central bank plays a vital function. They control interest rates and regulate the money supply to stabilize price and encourage economic expansion. Beyond monetary policy, they also regulate banks to ensure the stability of the whole financial system. Let's do a brief recap of what we have covered so far. We defined aggregate demand as the sum of consumption, investment, government spending, and net export. We learned that the AD curve slopes downward due to wealth, interest rate, and exchange rate effects. We distinguished between upward sloping short run aggregate supply caused by sticky wages and the vertical long run aggregate supply representing full capacity. Finally, we noted how fiscal and monetary policy are used to manage these forces. The modern economy is complex. What are the primary challenges to maintain a stable balance between AD and AS? First, business cycle and economic shocks. Economies naturally expand and contracts. Unexpected events like natural disasters or pandemics can magnify these fluctuations. Second, technological innovations. While technology boosts productivity, increasing AS, it can also displace traditional industries, causing labor market disruptions. Third, government policies. There is a time lag between implementing policy and their impact. This makes it challenging to maintain stability. Fourth, international trade. Global imbalance or trade wars can disrupt AD and AS. Finally, demographic changes. An aging population may reduce the labor force producing AS while also shifting consumer preferences. Let us now analyze the specific factors that causes shift in aggregate demand. A shift means the demand curve moves entirely to the right, which is positive, or to the left, which is negative. First, income. Higher national income enables households to consume more, leading to a positive shift. Conversely, falling income constrain consumption, causing a negative shift. Second, population. A growing population means more consumers, leading to a positive shift. An aging or declining population leads to a negative shift. Third, interest rate. Lower interest rate reduce borrowing cost and increase asset prices, the wealth effect, encouraging spending and causing a positive shift. Higher rates do the opposite. Continuing with factors affecting aggregate demand, consider wealth. An increase in household asset like property or investment make individual feels secure, leading to a positive shift. Next is credit availability. When credit is readily available, consumers and businesses take a debt to finance spending, shifting AD positively. Tight credit leads to a negative shift. Then we have government demand. Expansionary fiscal policies such as increased spending inject funds into the economy, causing a positive shift. Contractionary policies withdrew funds, causing a negative shift. Finally, let's look at the remaining factors for AD shifts. Taxation. Lower taxes increase disposable income and business profits, leading to a positive shift. Foreign demand. Strong global growth increases demand for our export, causing a positive shift. Investment. High level of investment in capital goods stimulate growth and shift AD positively. And importantly, expectations. If businesses and consumer anticipate a strong economy, they spend more, now creating a positive shift. If they fear a downturn, they cut back, causing a negative shift. Let's recap this session. We have identified 10 distinct factors that shift aggregate demand. It is crucial to remember that factors enhancing spending power like higher income, lower interest rates, lower taxes, and easy credit cause a positive shift to the right of aggregate demand. Factors that constrain spending like higher taxes, tight credit, or negative expectations cause a negative shift of the aggregate demand to the left. Now we turn to the supply side. What causes the aggregate supply curve to shift? The first major determinant is cost. A decrease in input cost such as labor or raw materials make production more profitable, leading to a positive shift in aggregate supply. An increase in cost results in a negative shift. Second is investment. Investment in new capital goods improve capacity. This leads to a positive shift as firm can produce more efficiently. Third is productivity. Higher productivity resulting from better technology or skills allows for more output with the same resources. This causes a positive shift in aggregate supply. Let's continue with factors shifting aggregate supply. Interest rate affect supply too. Lower rates make borrowing for capital investment attractive, leading to a positive shift. Higher rate discourage investment, causing a negative shift. Credit availability is similar. When businesses can easily access loans, They expand production capabilities, shifting aggregate supply positively. Foreign supply also matters. If imported materials are readily available through thriving trade, domestic firms became more efficient, leading to a positive shift. Trade barriers, however, can lead to a negative shift. Finally, we must consider profit and taxation. Profit: when businesses experience high profits, they are motivated to invest in expanding production. This results in a positive shift in aggregate supply. Taxation: corporate tax policies impact supply directly. Tax cuts on investment encourage firms to buy capital goods, leading to a positive shift. Tax increases diminish profitability and discourage investment, leading to a negative shift. Policymakers must balance these variables: cost, investment, productivity, and others to foster economic stability. We have discussed goods and services, but what about people? How do demand and supply affect employment? The labor market operates via the interplay of labor demand and labor supply. Labor demand is the quantity of workers companies are ready to employ. Crucially, this is contingent upon the aggregate demand for products. When demand for goods rises, firms must hire more personnel to increase output. Labor supply is the number of individuals willing to work. This is influenced by population growth, demographics, and education. A well educated workforce increases the effective labor supply. How are wages set? In a competitive market, the equilibrium pay rate is determined where labor demand equals labor supply. However, real world imperfections like minimum wage laws can cause deviations. When deviations occurs, we see unemployment. We categorize unemployment into four types. First, frictional, temporary joblessness between jobs. Second, structural, a mismatch between worker skill and employer needs. Third, cyclical, linked to economic downturns when demand for labor falls. Fourth is seasonal, arising from seasonal variation like tourism or agriculture. Employment is critical for growth. Why? Because high employment leads to higher incomes, which fuels consumer spending, creating a virtuous cycle of economic growth. Governments use policies to influence this. Demand side policies like fiscal policy boost the demand for goods, which in turn boost the demand for labor. Supply side policy focus on the workforce itself. By allocating resources to education and training, they enhance skills and productivity. This improves the labor supply and foster long-term employment opportunities. Let's recap our session on employment. We learned that the demand for labor is derived from the demand for goods. We identified that wages are theoretically determined as the intersection of labor supply and demand. We also distinguished between frictional, structural, cyclical, and seasonal unemployment. Finally, we noted that both demand side and supply side policies are essential for creating an environment conducive to job creation. Now we turn to a classical economic theory, Say's law of markets, formulated by Jean-Baptiste Say in the early 19th century. What is the core message of this law? It is often summarized by the phrase supply creates its own demand. This means that the process of producing goods generate the necessary money to acquire other goods. Put simply, production generates the purchasing power to consume. Therefore, according to Say's, an economy cannot have overall excess production because aggregate supply will always match aggregate demand. Say's law relies on specific assumptions to hold true. First, it assumes markets are perfectly competitive and flexible, allowing efficient resources allocation. Second, there are no barriers to the movement of resources between industries. Third, money is neutral. It serves only as a medium of exchange and do not affect real variables. Fourth, and critically, it assumes savings are immediately and fully invested. This ensures a continuous flow of income and expenditure without hoardings. What are the implications of this law? It suggests the economy always tends towards full employment and is inherently stable. Consequently, it advocates for a limited role for government, arguing that interventions is unnecessary. However, this law has been heavily criticized, notably by John Maynard Keynes. Critics argue it commits the fallacy of composition, assuming what is true for one producer is true for the whole economy. They also argue money is not neutral. Changes in money supply affect the real economy. Finally, the paradox of thrift suggests that if anyone saves more, aggregate demand falls, contrary to Say's assumption that savings are automatically invested. Let us illustrate Say's law with the specific example from our text. Example 1. A farmer grows wheat and sells it. The income he receives allows him to purchase bread from a baker. The supply of wheat created the demand for bread. Example 2. A furniture manufacturer produces tables. The income earned pays the workers. The workers then use their wages to purchase other goods. Third example is a software business sells an application. The revenue compensates worker who then buy products from other enterprises. These examples show the correlation between the supply and demand at a micro level, though modern economists debate its validity at the macro level. In conclusion, aggregate demand and aggregate supply provide the essential framework for understanding the determinants of output, employment, and price level. By analyzing the factors that influence these variables, ranging from interest rate and taxation to technology and demographics, policymakers can develop effective strategies. While classical theories like Say's law emphasize production, modern analysis requires us to understand the complex interaction of both the supply and demand to ensure economic well being. I assume that you have all derived a valuable insight from this lecture. Thank you, esteemed learners, for your attention. Continue your exploration, remain intrigued, and keep going in your quest for knowledge.